Hi everyone, I'm Maria Gracia Santillana. I'm a reporter here at Forbes on the digital assets team, and I'm here today with Nina Bimbisheva, my colleague, to talk about the story that we wrote about the myth of decentralization in the crypto industry. So let's start from the bare bones, Nina. What is decentralization?
Perfect beginning for this. I think we really have to go back here to how this trillion-dollar industry started with, of course, Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper, where he outlined this idea for a peer-to-peer payment system without the traditional middlemen like banks or brokers. And it's been 15 years since then. Now we have thousands of decentralized applications on top of multiple blockchains, hundreds of cryptocurrencies. There's all this exciting technology, but at the same time, many of these applications don't have mainstream adoption, right? And especially in the past year, we saw a lot of scandals and bankruptcies within crypto. Of course, people will draw the line between the companies that failed and decentralized components of it. And I think it adds to the conversation, but also makes it very complicated. So I'm excited to talk to you about all of those components and moving parts. I think the simple answer is that I would love to quote one of our sources, and this is something we heard from, I think, multiple people as we were doing this story. Decentralization is a means, not an end in itself. So to kind of unwrap it a little bit, it's a way for a lot of these projects to build, the new internet, new financial system. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that point too, right, of like it's a process. And I think the perfect example, which we talk about in our story, is this decentralized autonomous organization, Aragon, which started out, as a couple of founders with the project with the idea of like, hey, pretty lofty goals, honestly, like we're going to start this like decentralized almost court and legal system where, we'll have our own rules, and if something happens, this like technology will just answer yes or no. And in the last 5 years since it was started, we've really seen kind of an organization who wanted to build the technology, right, wanted to build the smart contracts to implement these processes, really kind of find and see itself in like the downsides to that, right? So what are some of those downsides? What are some of the things that like our sources were like, hey, maybe decentralization isn't so good for this?
I think that first of all, it's that it's still early, is what people in crypto like to say. You can't be decentralized from the start. You have to build, and a lot of these projects are very early on. Then we also have regulatory pressure, and that's of course a big component of this discussion, especially recently with actions against entities like DAO, where regulators are trying to go after something that calls itself a decentralized organization, and they need somebody to appear in court. In fact, that case ended with a default judgment where none of the members showed up. That was credited towards CFTC, and they imposed a fine. I'm not sure if they were able to collect it because we couldn't get in touch with any of the people at Uki. So here's another part. But also wanted to ask you, I mean, Aragon, you did most of the reporting there, and why do you think that case was so important to go into deeper? Is there something that can be said about things that happen at Aragon that will tell us more about the problems with DAOs and kind of what other issues these organizations are having?
Yeah, so what's interesting about Aragon is that it really kind of put itself in the market as like the DAO of DAOs, right? It was a project that was going to build the technology to implement these voting systems within these organizations. And they were pretty big, right? They have over 7,500 customers. all of which hold about 25 billion in treasury. So we're talking about a lot of organizations holding a lot of money in their hands. And so their idea was like, hey, we're going to create this technology to really allow the voting mechanisms to take place. And so that when I, have a token that allows me to vote in a operational decision of the organization, I can do that a little bit like a board of directors in a traditional company would kind of allow. But what they really found themselves struggling with is that decentralization is not perfect. Decentralization is really hard when you need to run a company or organization like day to day, which I think also interesting, right? A lot of these projects, and I'm sure you found this too, right? Like resist calling themselves a company. And so what they did is like once they raised all of their 25 million in funding, when they like launched their token, they put it all in an association. So the Aragon Association was a nonprofit in Switzerland that kind of held this treasury. And the ultimate goal was going to be to transfer all this treasury into the hands of the DAO. It's kind of into the hands of the people or the people who were interested in this, so that they could allocate like, hey, like, we as a group of developers want to do this, like this is our budget, this is how much we need, we'll launch it. The difficulty in there is that if you have kind of an open market for this token, right, anyone can buy it. And so you have this tension between the token holders that really believed in the mission of Aragon, whatever that was, right? Like, let's create this perfect ideal system of legality, which kind of transitioned into like, let's create this really good technology to implement these systems, with the people who are seeing the price of the token go up and be like, hey, like this is a financial opportunity for me, and I want to get in and be able to cash out to maximize my profit. And so you have two competing interests. One's of like, okay, maybe the technology comes out of it, comes at a cost, and you're going to spend a lot of money, so your token's going to come down. But the other people say like, hey, like I just want to get my money's worth out of this. And so you have this tension. And so what Aragon, the association, ultimately decided to do unilaterally, right? Like to this point of like, are things truly decentralized? Like in the beginning, not really. There's someone that holds the power. And so the association on November decided to say like, hey, we're going to dissolve this. Here's an allotted amount of money. It was about $190 million. You can cash out, take your tokens, convert it into Ether, another cryptocurrency, and essentially leave. Like, we're going to regroup, reform, and we're going to become a traditional company. Which obviously, if you're supposed to be the DAO of DAOs, you're a company and an organization building the technology for other organizations. That comes like a big pushback. And there was a lot of pushback from some token holders who were saying like, hey, why did you get to decide this without telling me, right? Like, I'm supposed to have a vote in what happens. And so it really becomes this like tension of like the big players involved. Some people think it's a scam. A group of token holders decided to like allocate about $300,000 of stable coins, USDC, to sue the association. We are not very sure like what's happening there. We couldn't talk to the firm that was going to sue, and current leadership is not part of the association, so they don't know anything about the suit that's going on. But yeah, I think, to more directly answer your point, it really found itself in this trouble of like, decentralization doesn't work operationally. And then when it doesn't work operationally, you really have to become centralized. And that's when, these unilateral decision happens, which is very like antithetical to what this was created to be. The ethos and the idea of like the myth, right, that we call of decentralization. Why do you think that like myth of decentralization was so powerful to a lot of people in the crypto industry?
Something that I discussed with one of the sources, she's the founder of the Defiant, the publication that covers decentralized finance, Camilla Russo. And she said, I think, a very important thing, that at some point, whoever is coming into crypto started feeling pressured to promote that, to say, we are decentralized. That's how you get attention. That's how you get investors. And we all remember how during the bull market, everyone jumped on the Web3 bandwagon, right? We're building decentralized internet. So that's also, I think, a big part of it. But another thing that she said that was really important, I feel, we hear this phrase, decentralization theater. Yeah. That, okay, we can agree that things are still in the works, and you may not get it 100% from the start, but at least be transparent about it, right?
Yeah.
With Aragon, for example, and with many other DAOs and decentralized projects, there's an association or a foundation, and there's a DAO, and it's not always clear how these entities interact with each other and who's responsible for what, and how the votes are distributed and things like that.
Yeah, I think that reminds me, right, like you talk about an example where a certain VC firm held the majority of the votes for a DAO, and how, it's a VC firm and it's a DAO supposed to be decentralized. Talk to me a little bit about what that tension was like.
This is something we didn't end up putting in the story because there's already so much.
Yeah.
But yes, it also has to be talked about. It's no secret that venture capital investors get tokens sometimes for the projects that they invest in. But a lot of them will argue that it's typically a small allocation, not more than 3% or 5% of the tokens, and meaning that they don't have a substantial voting power. But we saw that these issues do arise and people talk about them. So I think that's also important to understand what is happening. And it's, again, not always very transparent, right?
Yeah, and the last thing I do want to talk about, we briefly talked about regulation, but I wonder, what is kind of the mentality or the push for regulators right now? What seems to be kind of their main view when they look at, all of these decentralized projects, DeFi kind of going up in flames and, total volume locked going down? How are they looking at this?
Well, first of all, it really varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some are very crypto-friendly. In the United States, there's been a lot more pushback, especially with, kind of the big meltdowns. And crypto industry people will, draw a line between centralized finance and decentralized finance, saying it's, the centralized companies that failed. But regulators really kind of see it as one industry still, because at the end of the day, people, trade tokens and they take cryptocurrencies from, Coinbases and Krakens of the world to decentralized platforms. Then again, there are DAOs, and because it's a new technology, new kind of types of entities, they're very cautious. But also, if something happens, ultimately their goal is to protect investors. And they want to do that, but it's not often clear. So it ends up, with a lot of litigation and amicus briefs, which I think many will argue hurt the industry, but at the same time, regulators want to protect investors. Now, it's a whole different discussion about what they actually want to do, because there, again, it's also a very, very heated topic, but not to kind of go too deep into it. I will say that there are many moving parts to it. Like, for example, open source software. Can regulators punish founders of open source software developers if their services are used by bad actors, right? Like Tornado Cash. And well, they did. At least that's what they're trying to do. Those founders are under house arrest, which is obviously a huge issue. But again, this will all be decided in the coming years.
It's interesting to see, right, like that push and pull of like regulators wanting to protect investors and them saying like, hey, the laws that we have in place right now are good enough, you should conform to that, and the industry very much saying like, this is new technology, right? Like, this doesn't fall into the cases that you've planned for, because this is not, whether it be the beginning of the internet in the 1990s or when a lot of these like laws were made in the early 1900s, like adapt a little bit. But
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for a great discussion.
Of course,
Yeah.
always great chatting with
Yeah.
you.